on talking about really what's going on in the college landscape. Like I talked about, there's been many different things that the college basketball, football world has been kind of dealing with. A lot of people talked about the likeness, the images and likeness. People signing to different agents to get that stuff done, so that way you're able to get paid for what you're able to do. But nevertheless, like I said, the big thing is now is the fact that there is now a created, I would say, trying to think what the right word is. It's one of those. It's like a created system or created class or whatever you want to kind of use on it. And basically, what's going on right now is that you are seeing a shift in basically college sports since honestly the college football playoffs. I think, to me, we're seeing a huge paradigm shift of something that I think that a lot of us, I'm not sure if we're really ready for this conversation, to be honest with you. And the reason why I don't think we're ready for it, Shakhtar Champions League winners. Hey, I see you, Sean. I think the reason why we're not ready for this is because I think that this is going to have a huge impact. Also, guys, let me know how the mic sounds. I know that I'm recording this for people to watch a little bit later, but let me know how the microphone quality sounds so I know whether or not to keep this setting or to go with a different setting. But nevertheless, I think the big thing is that the SEC and ESPN, obviously ESPN has the rights and created the SEC network, so that way they have kind of exclusive rights and coverage to the SEC network. We know that the SEC is probably one of the most watched programs or one of the most watched conferences in all the land, just due to the fact that, they have Alabama, who's a predominantly big winner in their conference. LSU, another predominantly big winner. Georgia, usually a contender, and so on and so forth. And then, once Texas A&M joined, after being in the Big Ten, that's when, what's up, Justin? How you doing, man? I didn't see your comment. Hopefully you are doing well. Once we saw that Texas A&M was jumping ship and going to a different conference, that's when we saw, I believe we kind of saw like a shift in the paradox of college sports as we know it. I think, to kind of go to more towards the college football side of things, I think that a lot of people are interested in this because, we're looking for ways to especially for the different conferences, right? Because we know that it's, for the most part, the SEC dominates college football, and kind of dominates, I believe, a little bit of basketball, but more so I think the ACC dominates a little bit more basketball. I know Clemson has had their big run lately in the college football world, but we all know that it's really, the SEC that kind of runs that town. And that's the reason why I think you saw teams like Texas and Oklahoma move over to the conference. Those two teams are really looking to kind of get into the action of the SEC, and really start to kind of talk about these like big name rivalries and big name matchups that I think a lot of, delusional fans, I would say, just due to the fact that, Texas hasn't been a predominantly big winner in football and in basketball for a very long time. I know that they want to be that. I think Oklahoma has had a little bit more success than them in the recent years, whereas I believe Texas is trying to get back to that route. The only problem with Texas, in my opinion, is that I feel like it's going to be, they're going to have to continue to stay in this conference, and kind of try to keep the recruits, because there's a lot of recruits that come from Texas that go out of state. They go to an Alabama, they go to the SEC and don't really stay in state. But I believe with this move, you might be able to see these guys stay a little bit more in the state. But nevertheless, how this relates to basketball is that I believe that it's going to change the landscape as we speak. With adding Oklahoma and Texas, kind of going back to that point I was talking about, it really allows the SEC to kind of, and if you guys don't watch football in the English Premier League or just anywhere in just Europe, it kind of reminds you of those systems where it's like you have the top clubs in the SEC and then everybody else is kind of underneath them, right? Because, the SEC is not just going to let anybody join the conference. I mean, let's check to see how many like Division I conferences there are in and just kind of talk about what conferences are there and like what's going to be the dominant conference in the future. I'll just kind of name all the ones that are in that are active right now. You got the American East Conference, you got the Athletic Conference, American Athletic Conference, Athletic Coast Conference, Athletic Sun, Athletic 10, the Big East, the Big Sky, Big South, Big 10, Big 12, Big West, Colonial Athletic Association, Conference USA, Horizon, Ivy League, Metro Atlantic, Mid American, Mid Eastern, Missouri Valley, Mountain West. Obviously, you have your independents. Northeast Conference, Ohio Valley, Pac-12, Patriot League, Southeastern Conference, Southern Conference, Southland Conference, Southwestern Athletic Conference. Obviously, you got the Summit League, you got the Sun Belt, you got West Coast Conference, and then you got, of course, the Western Athletic Conference. And so you're kind of seeing that there is a lot of conferences in this. And the problem that I see with the SEC getting getting those two teams in the Big 12, from the Big 12, I should say, really is going to, what does that mean for the rest of the Big 12? Does the rest of the Big 12 stay as the Big 12 and kind of move teams up? And then I believe it kind of ruins some of the lower leagues that are kind of dominant in their own league, right? So, like, for example, you have the Patriot League, whether that's like a Lehigh or, kind of whatever teams are in this conference, right? You got Lehigh, Army, American, Boston University, like a bunch of different members of this conference that are kind of dominant in their own retrospect. My concern, maybe not so much for basketball, because I believe that, with the way that the tournament's structured, you'll always get these teams to kind of be in there. But more so for football, you're kind of seeing a situation where, does this kind of hurt like teams like the Pac-12 conference? That they're, we're going to talk about the Big Ten, ACC, and Pac-12 gentleman agreement alliance is what I'm going to call it, because I believe, like, without anything written down in word or anything like that, words mean nothing to me. Like, I could say that, like, yeah, we have an alliance, but as soon as I see an opportunity that's going to be in my best interest, why would I not, as a conference, just be like, yeah, I'm going to kind of go on my own? And again, this might move teams. I think the athletic, the AAC, with teams, I believe, like Villanova are part of this, I believe. Trying to see where the current members are. Houston, another university that does pretty well on both football and basketball. Temple, Tulane, like, you're going to see a lot of these teams maybe joining up to go to the Big 12. I think University of Houston would be crazy not to be in the Big 12 instead of the AAC. Same thing with teams like the University of Cincinnati or even UConn at this point. UConn, I would probably go back to the Big East if I was them. Just due to the fact that it's like, the Big East is one of the biggest, like, basketball, or used to be, I believe, with the history and stuff like that. And so I think what you're going to get is like these super conferences or these super leagues, no pun intended for my European soccer friends out there. And then you're going to basically have them kind of dominate kind of the top. And it's going to be, what I will say that what this does is that it does clean a new slate for teams to kind of, I believe, like, tradition and all that stuff is going to be thrown out the window with this new super conference coming up. Because right now, you have your, like, Alabamas who have their history. You have the Dukes and the Syracuse and, the other like big conglomerate teams in both basketball and football. Now that gets thrown out the window, because now basically, you can allow, like, a University of Houston to join one of your conferences, and maybe that allows, like, a new tradition, a new following. But I still think at the end of the day that this is a very dangerous precedent that we're setting in college sports, because I believe you're now going to limit opportunities in terms of, I believe that with the way that the structure is now, is like you allow many teams to eat the pie. Whereas I feel like now that you're doing these super conferences and super leagues, you're now going to get a situation where you're going to see these teams not really share much of the pie. Alabama's going to get the huge cut of it, because they're able to recruit. They have the recruiting power, the money, and all this other stuff to get themselves in a situation where they don't have to worry about finances. Whereas teams like University of Central Florida or Cincinnati or any of these other smaller conferences, the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, I'm not even sure who's in this conference right now. Former members of Savannah State, but you got like Morgan State, Norfolk, North Texas, AT&T, a lot of the HBCUs, maybe this helps them out a little bit. I don't even know at this point. My big takeaway from this, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it a lot on the stream today, or kind of like is my big talking point today, is because I believe that this is going to be a bad thing. Like, for example, my friends, and I'm wearing the shirt right now, Gonzaga University right now is in the West Coast Conference. They play with Brigham Young, BYU, or sorry, I already said Brigham Young, but like Brigham Young, Loyola Marymount Pacific, and many of these other conferences out there. San Francisco also. And to me, like I said, my concern about it, in my opinion, is that like now with this being the case of the super teams and the super leagues, this allows a team like Gonzaga, who really helps out the other members of their league in the West Coast Conference. Now they might decide, like, why would we want to stay in the West Coast Conference when we can go to a Pac-12 or one of these other kind of like, or even the Big Ten, or one of these other type of conferences where you actually get more recognition, you get more money. Like, to me, like that's where I would go. Like, if I'm one of these teams or if I'm one of these players, like, why would I want to stay in the West Coast Conference? And Sean, maybe, I'm not sure if you're still with me or not, but and from your perspective, Sean, like, would you want to stay in the West Coast Conference, or would you want to move to like the Pac-12? It looks like Utah was one of the founding members of the West Coast Conference, but like, that's my thing. Like, teams like a one-man army team, I would say, like in the conference, like, does this hurt the West Coast Conference? And like, what does this do to teams like St. Mary's, San Diego, San Francisco, and Santa Clara? Like, do these teams get screwed over because Gonzaga is going to look at this and be like, well, we need to be in the Super League, whether we have a football team or not. We need to be in the Super League in order to contend and get our spots. Especially in the in the tournament, and even just because they always win their conference each and every year. Obviously, would lose all of their TV time if Gonzaga left, and that's the thing too. These teams are not being shown the revenue that I think that these conferences are looking for. My friends talked about the Super League that was in the in soccer. I know a lot of you guys aren't really soccer heads, but in the soccer league that was a lot of teams were doing, like Liverpool, Real Madrid, Barcelona, PSG, I think was part of it, even though they say they're not. But those teams were going to create their own kind of like super league, to kind of put it mildly, and basically just kind of have them share the revenue between each other and play against each other. And basically the best teams play against the best teams. And so to me, like the way that it's looking right now, I feel like we're going to get a different version of what was promised to a lot of people, right? We were promised competitive, fair, and balanced. Like that's kind of like what the NCAA's, trying to think of the right word. That's what their beliefs are. That's what their system is in. Their system is in, we are going to be fair and balanced, and we don't want to be, we don't want competitive advantages in any league. But my problem is that now you're creating a barrier for teams like BYU, like Loyola Marymount. If you allow like a Gonzaga, who's really good at basketball, who's now making a name for themselves as a dynasty team, consecutively getting one of the best classes in the entire nation for the past couple of years now, or at least in the top 10 in the last couple of years. A team like Gonzaga might look at this and be like, why would we want to stay in the West Coast Conference? We're not going to get the same amount of money. We're not going to be able to afford anything. And, in terms of, recruits, especially if they want to be where they're at right now, when they got Chet Holmgren, potentially they could get some other guys in the 2022 class that might help them out with their roster. It's like, to me, if I know that if I want to continuously get guys like Chet Holmgren through the door of Gonzaga, my best bet isn't to stay in the West Coast Conference. It's to go to the Pac-12. It's to go to the Big 12, and go to these other conferences where I'm actually going to get the recognition, where I'm actually going to get shown, to teams and to TV exposure time. These kids, they also look at that stuff too, especially with the top picks, until the sort of the thing changes where 18-year-olds can now go to the NBA. I know they can go to the G League, but I still think the G League is kind of a ripoff, in my opinion, because I feel like you still can't make the most money that you can, which I think is what these kids are looking for. So, in my opinion, it's like you look at all the situations, you look at everything that's going on, and my thing is. My concern about this is that now you're putting these other teams in a predicament where it's like, okay, the West Coast Conference might not be a conference anymore that I'm interested in. I know that it's not really a basketball conference, but you can talk about some of the other ones, like maybe even the Sun Belt Conference, another team that has like Appalachian State, Arkansas, Coastal Carolina, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, Little Rock, Louisiana, all these other teams, Troy, UT Arlington, like these teams. I think what it's going to cause is that now maybe in Arkansas State move somewhere else. When Gonzaga decided to stay because they almost left last year, they were given concessions that we only have to play the bottom teams in the conference once. Could football do something like that? I don't think football is going to do that, Sean. As much as I would say, because the problem with it being like that, Sean, is that the teams won't make the money and the revenue that they're looking for. These teams, these conferences are looking for the best interest of them. And in order to make, I think this is kind of the thing that I think the NCAA and these conferences are looking for. I think they're actually looking to compete with the NFL, with the NBA, and with basically with pro sports at this point. Because you're seeing them form conferences and form leagues that you could be like, wow, this could be competitive night in and night out for however many games that they play. Like, I think right now we're looking at a situation where these organizations are looking to finally compete with the pro sports. Like, they're no longer trying to be like, oh, we're our own niche of sport, right? We're our amateur sports and our pro sports. Like, they want to become, in my opinion, they want to move towards like competing with those guys because they're seeing the big money that the NFL makes. I think everybody sees what the NFL is doing right now and wants to copy that model. As much as I have gripes with the NFL, they are probably the best ran league in the nation just due to the fact of how much money they bring in each night and every night that they put games on. Like, every game matters. And I think that's what, especially in the football side of things for this college sports, you're seeing that with the way that the conferences are lined up, right? With Texas and Oklahoma, two powerhouse conferences or two powerhouse teams with history of winning championships, the Vince Young championship, and we can talk about Oklahoma. My thing to me is that I think these teams are really looking at a situation where they want to make the most money that they can, Sean. So as much as I would say that they would like to do the Gonzaga thing, I think they're going to look at it. And they're going to see, like, why would we want to play, no offense to Santa Clara, but like, why would we want to play Santa Clara, which is going to bring us no revenue, when we could play like an Oregon or a Utah, Utah with the only football being in town in that state. That's the only reason why I bring them up. Or, I know BYU counts, but maybe BYU actually goes into the Pac-12 now. But more so, like, let's say, for example, Washington. Washington, a much bigger team, a much bigger name, just in terms of history and stuff like that. I know Gonzaga is a lot bigger now. But in terms of that situation, Sean, now you're seeing a sort of thing where now it's like, do I want to play a Santa Clara, which, has a small market size, or would I want to play like a UW, or would I want to play like an Oregon, or would I want to play like a USC? Like, I would rather play a USC and get all that revenue rather than playing like a Santa Clara, again, another smaller California school. And I think that this is the direction that these commissioners are looking towards. And I kind of want to just read the article a little bit. I know this is more football, but I want to talk about it. This is from Heather Dinich from ESPN. She says that the Big Ten, ACC, and Pac-12 on Tuesday announced an alliance that ultimately aims to stabilize a volatile environment throughout college athletics by collaborating on weighty issues facing the industry and agreeing to create a future scheduling partnership. The scheduling component for football and women and men's basketball will begin as soon as the practical, while honoring current contractual obligations. But the decision makers involved said that the alliance was not driven by revenue, which is absolutely full of crap and also cap. I don't care what anybody says. You could literally be the dumbest person in the world. I'm not trying to kind of disparage dumb people. But you could literally be the dumbest person in the world and realize that they're doing this for money. Like, as much as they want to say that we're doing this to protect the student athlete, that was the term they coined years ago in order to make sure that they don't pay these athletes. It's the same thing that they're doing now. It's like, we're here to really protect our people. We're trying to protect the kids. We're trying to protect everything else by doing this. And it's just like, no, you want the money, which is fine. Just say it. I think we're living in a naive world if we don't think that this is money driven. But again, let's continue reading. While there is no contractual agreement between the three leagues as far as it relates to the alliance, nothing in writing that prevents them from poaching each other's teams. The message conveyed Tuesday was that the creation of the partnership lessens an incentive for that. It was a moment in time for the three new commissioners to be able to come together and say there's a chance to be really a volatile time, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips said. I think we all know the history of expansion. After one leads to another. Very rarely has there ever been a domino that's fallen that's knocked over a few subsequent membership changes. We've had some friction among two of our really important conferences that make up the Power Five, and so to try to stabilize, to try to work through the next several seasons in the way that collaboratively work together is so critical and important. Three commissioners who created the partnership earlier this month, the Big Ten, Kevin Warren, Pac-12, George Kalivikoff, Phillips, spoke to reporters on the video conference call in front of a blue background that already combined the logos of the three conferences. The president, chancellors, and athletic directors of all 41 universities unanimously supported the alliance, according to the news release. And again, my thing is that like you can have the alliance. You can talk about, we're going to have a gentleman's agreement that we're not going to sell out. And, if, for example, let's say, I'm trying to think of like a team that potentially could, one of the Big 12 teams, right? Because the Big 12 is kind of one of those, the conference, they're really looking for, those, now it's the Big 10, basically. You have another 10 in the conference. Like, do those teams, do you be like, does that mean, for example, like Utah? They probably look to be more of a Big 12 team, in my opinion. Like, do you see Utah moving over to that conference? You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of these teams are going to look at it and be like, well, the ACC could, maybe they move over to the Big 10 and kind of be in that. And that's the thing that's going to happen. You're going to get dominoes that fall, and now it's like, okay, now we got to replace one of these teams with another team, like one of the smaller conferences in this thing. Like, for example, like I talked about with the American Athletic Conference with a team like Houston, right? Houston right now plays in a very much, I would say, a substantially smaller conference than the Big 10 or the Pac-12 or any of these other conferences. The Big 10, it doesn't matter what the conference name is, but like they play in a significantly lesser known conference than I believe they would like. I'm sure that the University of Houston would love to play in a very much more tougher conference. And that to me is where, like I said, I really have an issue with it, because now I think you're going to get that domino effect. I know that they put an alliance to kind of stop the Band-Aid, but I still feel like there's a big wound that's opened. And right now they're just trying to cover a Band-Aid with it by saying that they're going to form an alliance, right? Because, like I said, Gonzaga, a basketball team that maybe they just want to go play in a tougher conference now. Like they've tried the West Coast Conference so many times. They saw like how dominant they are, and they're just going to realize like, look, why would I want to stay in this conference when I know I can go to the Pac-12 and get more money? Same thing with BYU. BYU is in the same conference for basketball, at least. I know football, they're independent. But it's like, if I'm one of these teams, like I said, like BYU or like these or like Gonzaga, why would I want to stay in the West Coast Conference when I know my worth and my value? I can definitely get into the Pac-12, and become the Pac-14. And then maybe some of the Pac-12 teams are like, well, if you're going to add those two teams, I'm going to move over to the Big 10, or I'm going to move over to the ACC. And I feel like that's the problem with this conference realignment. I think what we're kind of forgetting too is the history of the sport. And again, I think that I love the fact that these players are getting paid, and I think that's the main important part that should have changed from college basketball, or just college sports in general. They should be able to make money off their likeness. Like, I've always agreed with that. Now, the only problem now with college sports is that they're trying to change so much, because now they're realizing like, okay, now we can't profit as much off these kids. We need to make the money elsewhere. We need to make the money back elsewhere. And that's where I feel like this move comes in to play, where now Texas and Oklahoma are like, well, shoot, we're one of the biggest name brands in the sports history. We aren't going to make the money from playing these really bad Big 12 teams, like a Baylor. I know that they have their history, but Baylor, predominantly not a great football school, and I'm talking more football here. Not, has their moments, but not very good. TCU, same thing. Doesn't really have a history of winning. Who else is in the Big 12 right now? Before they kind of move over, West Virginia again. Not really that strong of a team. Oklahoma State again, not really strong team. Kansas State, Kansas, Iowa State, Baylor. Like those teams are not generally known as like a powerhouse team. For some of those teams for basketball, and I can see it, but otherwise, these teams are more so looking. Texas Tech again. Trying to get more people to come in and trying to do their thing. Texas is such a big state that they need to really be able to retain these guys. But now these teams are looking to, they're trying to change. They're trying to change conferences, obviously with Texas and Oklahoma being the founding members of that conference, moving over to the SEC because now they know they can make so much more money playing in that conference rather than playing in a conference where, you're playing at TCU every year and you're always getting your butt kicked and never making the playoffs, especially with the way that the playoffs are right now. I know that it's going to go to like a 12-team format, if I'm not mistaken, for football. But, this doesn't really help the big, whatchamacallit. It doesn't really help the Big 12. Some of their former members, we talked about it. Texas A&M joined the SEC, Missouri joined the SEC, Nebraska joined the Big 10, and Colorado joined the Pac-12. So like some of their former members backed out, and it used to be a lot bigger, right? Think about it. TCU and West Virginia joined in 2012. Meanwhile, you lost 4 teams in the matter of a couple of years. And this to me, Sean, I texted you about this. Like this to me just reeks of a super league. Like basically you're going to get like a top of the line conference with the SEC with, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and now you're going to have Texas and Oklahoma also be in this conference where I feel like it's now going to look like the Premier League, where it's like now it's going to be ranked that way. And then, maybe, if you're not performing well in this SEC conference, who knows? They might kick you out and say, hey, you're not really a moneymaker for us. Or like maybe we'll see like switches of conferences, let's look at the SEC and look at like teams that could potentially, that's not what I want. Southeastern Conference. That's what I want, I think. Yeah. We can look at some of their members. Georgia Tech was a former member of theirs. Tulane was a former member. It's just crazy to think about that. But let's look at like what they have right now. You got Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Missouri, South Carolina. Yeah, and that's the thing. You might see all 4 SEC teams in the playoffs. Tennessee, Vanderbilt. And then you got the West Division. You got Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. Like now you're starting to see like this conference is stacked, and now you're adding 2 more teams to that with Texas and Oklahoma, which I believe they'll probably play in the same conference. But what doesn't allow the SEC to be like, well, Arkansas, you really haven't done anything for us. Let's see who else. Mississippi State, you haven't really done anything for us. Kentucky, you do your basketball thing, that's fine. But like Missouri, what have you done for us? South Carolina, what have you done for us lately? Tennessee, Vanderbilt, what have you guys done for us lately? And now you might get a situation where maybe they do a system where they kick those teams down and, 3 or 4 new teams move up, and then it's like a Premier League system. If you guys don't know how it works, it's usually like the top of the table. It's 1 through 20, and the bottom 3 teams in that league go down to the lower division. And that's potentially what and I know that won't ever happen, but that's potentially what they could decide. Like, look, we want to, we know that you guys are interested in this SEC ESPN conglomerate that they're trying to form in with these 2 teaming up. I think that's the reason why you're seeing a lot of people sue ESPN right now, is because they're tired of ESPN meddling in this situation where they're trying to make the most money that they can possible, right? I'm sure it was ESPN's idea to bring in Texas and Oklahoma into the fray, because why wouldn't you, right? You're talking about 2 teams with the most prestigious brand names in college specifically college football and also college basketball with some of these teams. Like, why would I not want to bring these teams in and potentially, help out my team? And that's what I think you're going to see here from this sort of situation. Like I said, I think what disappoints me the most about it, and if I'm going to keep it real with you guys, is the fact that I think that like I said, you're going to see like a lot of imbalances in a bunch of leagues. And now, it's going to be looking at a situation where you see like the members who joined, right? You got Swanee. I'm not sure where they play now. It looks like they play in Division 3, but they were a founding member of the SEC. That's not really something. Georgia Tech, another former member. Tulane, another former member, and then honestly moved over to a different conference. And that to me is what you're going to see, is that you're going to see a lot of different movements from these teams. And I think it's going to hurt college sports in general, right? Because now, what's to say that like teams like maybe not Swanee's not a good example. We can go back to the West Coast Conference, but I can even talk about like the Ohio Valley Conference, right? You got Tennessee Tech, you got Tennessee State, all these teams, Jacksonville State. You got all these teams in this conference. What's to say that, the NCAA looks at their balance sheets? These teams look at their balance sheets and say, wow, we can't afford an athletic program anymore because there's a lot of teams moving up a division. They're not playing these lower teams anymore. These teams are not going to be playing like the really crappy teams. No more Appalachian State versus Alabama. It's going to be Alabama versus Oklahoma twice a year now. Whereas before, now, Alabama play Appalachian State. That money helped out Appalachian State. And you're going to see that continuously throughout the whole years now, where these conferences are going to look at it and be like, we want to be the most competitive conference that we can be in all our sports, especially with basketball and football being the top two earners for this, for the college. What's to say that these teams don't decide? Sorry for that. What's to say that these teams don't decide, like, look, I like where our team is heading. I don't want to play at Jacksonville State or a Morehead State, or a Murray State. These teams that, hosted players, Weber State, we can even talk about them, players like John Morant, Damian Lillard, and, to kind of bring those guys. Maybe those guys don't get looks against, against Division 1 opponents. And then you're like, maybe those guys don't get discovered and maybe they don't get into the NBA. I mean, it's the same thing with a lot of these players. And that to me is the frustrating part about it. I think we need to start looking at this as a serious thing, because now I feel like a lot of these teams in the lower divisions are going to get absolutely brutalized in terms of revenue. And I think you're going to lose a lot of jobs and also a lot of scholarship opportunities and a lot of, more so dollars, because, these coaches are used to getting paid a certain amount of money. These coaches aren't going to stay at a West Coast conference if I know my salary is getting cut into like pieces, right? If I was earning like 2.5 mil to coach, or like, let's say like I was earning 500,000 to coach at San Francisco, and now my salary gets cut into like 100,000. Why would I want to stay as a coach of San Francisco when I can be an assistant coach at one of the bigger top 5 conferences, or, one of the power conferences, and be like, I would like an assistant job, please, so I can keep my $500,000 salary and, go to where the money's at. And I think that's what we're looking at here when it comes to this sort of super conference and allegiance that's going on. Like, I think this is a huge issue that ESPN is opening up Pandora's box here. And I think you're going to see a lot of issues, in my opinion. Let me know in the comment section down below what do you guys make. I know I've been talking a lot, and that's just due to the fact that no one's really with me today. It's by myself again, and that's just fine. But I would love to know what you guys think. Yeah, it's going to be bad for the athletes and bad for the schools. Athletes will have a hard time getting drafted if we start forming super leagues. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, players aren't going to be able to get the exposure that they need to get themselves looked at. I know that the cream of the crop will always go to the top, right? Whether that's a John Morant, a Dame Lillard, but what about the guys that aren't like that? Like a Duncan Robinson, or, I know Duncan Robinson got discovered and stuff like that. But maybe a Jimmy Butler, or, one of these second round players that decides, I want to play more minutes at a smaller school. And then all of a sudden it's like these coaches, I know that they have coaches film, that the coaches obviously film so they can scout and talk about like what they did bad in the game, what they did good in the game. But now you're going to get a situation where you're looking at it and it's just like, it's just not easily accessible for those scouts anymore to just be like, oh, I'll just watch it on ESPN, or I'll just watch it on, Fox or whatever, CBS or whatever kind of programming that they watch it on. And especially, I think this is going to be bad for football in that sense because now it's like you're not going to be looking at these teams. What's to say that a scout's not going to be like, well, I'd rather much watch. It's easy. I think what we also have to remember too is that we as humans we like to take maybe not the easy way out is the right word, but we like convenience, right? So the convenience for me would be, all right, would I rather watch the AAC or would I rather watch the SEC, which I know is going to be on ESPN Plus or ESPN, and I can watch their games. And it's like, why would I not want to take a talent from one of those teams rather than a team from the AAC, like University of Houston or University of Cincinnati? Like that to me is what you're going to get. And to me, when I look at that and when I see that being the case, I get worried as a fan and also as a coach myself, who wants to get into the sport, and to go into the college rankings and become a college coach. I feel like it's going to be hard for me and for anybody that's interested in becoming a coach now. I mean, I know there's plenty of opportunities. I'm not saying that there's not going to be, but I think you're limiting the opportunities of mobility for a lot of these coaches, right? What's to say that, I'm going to not be stuck in the Big Sky Conference for the rest of my life. Whereas if it's the same way that it was now, I can go from the Big Sky to go maybe to the Athletic 10 and then maybe go to the American Athletic Conference and then go to the SEC, and then go to kind of staying in that realm of those top teams. But instead, now it's like, well, I can, I'm, do apologize for that. But again, that's kind of where I'm leaning towards when it comes to this sort of situation as it pertains to the college basketball and college football world. I think that this is going to be bad news bears, and I know that a lot of people are looking at this from a perspective of, well, we're really looking to kind of just being more in a chill mode, right? Or to be more so, what's the right word I'm looking for? I think we're going to get into a situation where we're not going to see that mobility anymore. We're just going to get stuck in this sort of, you're going to always be in this conference and there's no way that you can move up because, you're not going to get the same amount of revenue from the NCAA or from the people that are in your conference. Like, for example, I'm sure that the Big Sky Conference, when they had the Boise States of the world, when they had the Nevadas and the Gonzagas, especially more so those teams, the Memphis FedEx Alliance seems to be working well. Hopefully Penny gets some redemption next year after missing March Madness. Yeah, man, we'll talk about Imani Bates and his commitment to Memphis after we talk. I'm just about to wrap up on this just on this a little bit before we get going on that topic. But again, like I said, let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys make of this? I was making the thing with the Big Sky. They used to have a Gonzaga, they used to have a Boise State and a Cal State Northridge and a Nevada, and those teams probably brought in more revenue than a lot of these teams that they have right now, with a Montana, kind of a smaller school, but like an Idaho and Eastern Washington and many of these other schools. And you're looking at this and you're like, I'm not sure if there's going to be there's not going to be any upward mobility for any of these teams to go up into the conference, right? We're seeing that, Southern Utah, a team that used to be, if I'm not mistaken, they used to be in a different conference. They used to be in, before the Big Sky. I'm trying to remember what conference they were in. They're leaving for the WAC, the Western Athletic Conference, where they're going to be playing a little bit, better teams. Maybe you could say it's about the same, right? But at the same time, to me, I feel like it's just going to be one of those things where, like, now you're not going to get these teams. Like, for example, I'll just bring up Utah because I went there, right? Again, they used to play in the, if I'm not mistaken, they used to play in the West Coast Conference, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe they didn't play in the West Coast Conference. Where did they play? Shoot, where did they play? They played in the, what conference did they play in? Shoot, what conference did they used to play in? They used to play in one where they were, let me see Utah. see here. Just give me 1 second. Let's see here. I think Utah joined. When did they join? Give me 1 second, guys. I'm sorry to kind of do this. And I think we also have to talk about this before. I just read a little bit about this. On ES, University of Utah officially accepted the invitation to join their conference after being a member of the WAC with Arizona and Arizona State before those two left for the Pac-12 for the Pac-10. You just joined the Pac-12 from the Mountain West Conference. So we used to be part of the Mountain West Conference. And because of Urban Meyer and the work that he did, and Kyle Whittingham and those guys really kind of elevated the state and really elevated the college to go from the Mountain West Conference all the way to the Pac-12. I feel like you're not going to see that again if this move is able to you're able to create the super leagues. I know at one point it was looking like that there was going to be a super mega conference with it seems like the Big 12 and the Pac-12, and kind of making like a 24 team conference. But obviously that didn't fall through to fruition. And that's especially with the University of Colorado joining the Pac-12 as well. They were kind of in a situation as well. But more so Utah. Like I said, we were supposed to be a team that were supposed to stay in the Mountain West Conference. We were always looked at as kind of like the smaller underdog. We beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. We won the Tostito Fiesta Bowl, right? And now you're looking at a situation where you're seeing that Utah was able to upward mobility themselves to go to the Pac-12, right? Before, they were in some sort of conference that was, they were a charter member of the Mountain West Conference, right? With Air Force, with Colorado State, San Diego State, New Mexico. We were part of a lower, conference, by standards, right? And now that we've kind of moved on and went to the Pac-12, we're now able to have Pac-12 money. I kind of saw I'm trying to think of the right word, but I saw the benefits of being in the Pac-12 when I went to the University of Utah. We finally had a beautiful football facility. We had a beautiful workout center for the students. Like when we moved conferences, it changed the way that the buildings looked at the University of Utah. They had so much more influctuation of money, and you could see, and this is me speaking from firsthand experience. Like you're looking at this and you're like, with these super leagues and super conferences, you're never going to get one of the smaller teams to join one of the bigger conferences anymore. You're not going to get like a dominant powerhouse. Maybe you might be able to, but that's going to be due to like, a once in a generational talent of teams, and also a generational talent of a coach, at the right place at the right time for one of these smaller schools to move up to the conference. But, for example, like if Tennessee is doing horrible, meanwhile you have, let's say like the University of Cincinnati is balling out and they're, getting championships left and right in their conference, are we going to see the SEC kick out Tennessee? No. Tennessee is going to stay in there because they're a founding member of that conference. So to me, it's one of those situations where now you're adding Oklahoma and a Texas to a conference that already has so much potential, already has so much firepower to begin with. And like I said, you're now going to ruin the opportunities for these young players to compete, especially in the smaller conferences. And I know that I'm repeating myself, so I think I'll just end with this before we move on to the Imani Bates topic. As much as I love the way that, and as much as I would love, we've been calling for change in college sports for a very long time, and that was just due to the fact that the players were not getting paid. But I don't think what we called for was a switch of systems to where now we're dealing with the situation where where Texas and Oklahoma are now in the SEC, and now the Big 12 is going to look at a situation where it's like we don't know where the rest of our members should go, or if they should just stay in the conference and become the Big 10. And you're going to look at it and you're going to be surprised to see what you're going to find. But let me know in the comment section down below if you guys agree or disagree with my comments about the conferences. Do you think that it's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? Let us know in the comment section down below. And let me know what you guys make of it. Do you think this is going to be a great thing for college sports, or do you think that's going to be a bad thing for college sports? Let me know of your opinions and comments in the comment section down below. And please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe if you are new to the channel.